Meg is a good friend from IAAC. As you know, she's a biologist, and she's the founder of a new scientific discipline called the Canopy Biology. And we invite her because of several reasons. First, we are developing, as you may know, this year a new competition. Every 2 years, IAAC launch a competition trying to create a global discussion about some important ideas that are happening right now in the world. And then the topic for this year is design for biocities, because if 20 years ago, the big challenge about architecture and about cities was how digital technologies will transform the way we design buildings and we make cities, I would say that right now, 20 years later, we know more or less how this will happen. We have robots, we have this parametric design, we have rapid prototyping, we have huge 3D printers. IAAC is expert on that, as you know. We will have self-driving cars, we have drones flying around the world. There is big data. There are many things that are already happening, and more things will happen. But the big challenge right now is not anymore or only how digital technologies can help to make a better architecture and make it cities, but the question is how we can merge architecture with nature, how architecture and cities can learn from the environment, how can learn from the natural systems in order to transform the rules of architecture and the rules of urbanity. So I'm very happy because many students are also coming here. We don't have a camera in the main room, in the main space of the lecture hall at IAAC, but today there are physically there are some people here. And I was explaining that we are very much interested from the very beginning of IAAC. We were also interested on how architecture could follow the rules of nature, how this could be more natural. And if 20 years ago, we had a strong alliance with physicists, with computer programmers and so on, now we are more and more closely working with biologists and people that are leaders and inventors of new forms of looking to the nature. That's why today we invent to Meg, that is here with me. Yeah, Meg is here because Meg is an old friend from IAAC. She was here more than 10 years ago when we start doing projects in one place called Baidaura. IAAC owns a forest where we do several research over there. And then we were inspired by someone that was doing something exceptional, that is study the upper part of the forest, the canopy, and she will explain it better. But also not only this, she was trying to socialize the education about the forest. And that's why she became a kind of architect, like a forest architect, because she started to build the structures. So she's doing incredible things like building structures in the middle of the forest in order that young people, like families and everyone, can have access to places that in a normal way will never access. That is the upper part of the forest. So I think she will explain more her experience because she has published many books. The last one is called the Arbornaut. So in the same way that the astronauts, well, the astronaut was a new word invented in the 50s, 1950s, when people tried to go to the space. The Arbonauts are people like Meg that are going up to the trees, and they are trying to understand what is happening, not only in the ground level, but in all the levels in the forest. She's also working with National Geographic as explorer, and she's doing many projects, and she's launching several initiatives in order to protect the forests in the planet. As you know, one of the big challenges right now is not only to be digital and to be cool and to be great, but is on how to save the planet, because we see that we are in a kind of self-destructive process where we are cutting trees all over the world. The temperature of the planet is rising, and that's why in Europe and other places has defined a new mantra about how to make cities that are zero emissions. So that's why we want to learn from forests. That's why we want to learn from the science of the nature in order to try to make better architecture and make it cities. So I would like to give an applause to welcome Meg Lowman. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to share? Or?
I hope so. I will try. See if we can do that.
And then here you.
Oh,
Yeah.
was that good? Okay, thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here. And is it, no, it's not yet.
Yeah.
It's not. I will call upon you to come forward, my wonderful technician, technical expert here.
I think it's good. You can see the presentation from the.
No, but the screen, what the screen share is that. I don't know why this is here.
We only see it here.
It doesn't
Oh,
matter. So
okay.
you go ahead. Okay.
In the Zoom.
Okay, I guess the Zoom is better than in person. Fancy that. Anyway, I don't even know what the notes are. So we'll just focus on the pictures. I'm really happy to be here in the city of Gowdy, who is the tree person in your field. And I guess I'm the tree person in my field. So I hope I can learn a lot from all of you, as well as maybe you can learn something from me. I want to take you somewhere warm. A lot of the forests of the world are tropical, so we'll visit a few of those tonight, and hopefully you can get a sense of some of the global activities going on in forests around the world. But first of all, everyone here in person, raise your hand if you ever climbed a tree in your life. Oh my gosh, look, Vicente, almost everybody. So there's something primal in all of us, isn't there? The tree is somehow special. It usually makes people smile. And most of us have had that opportunity in our lives to think about trees in that way, which is really great. So somehow in my childhood, I took my tree climbing kid chapter and became an adult and still managed to climb trees. So tonight I'll share some of the tools that we use for exploration of the treetops, everything from hot air balloons to slingshots to climbing at night to building these beautiful sky bridges, of which I hope you might get one in Barcelona, and also using simple ropes and harnesses. So I did come here some 12 years ago. Here's Vicente when he was a young boy, and we had some amazing times up in the forests of your field site, which was great. We were just here yesterday with the Park Service talking about some opportunities maybe that could come true for Barcelona in the future. And 12 years ago when I was here, the students did projects that I was lucky to be part of, where they designed little canopy trails and designed canopy houses and all kinds of things up at your field site, which was really wonderful and quite fun at the time. So today I would like to take you to a couple of my field sites and start by saying that most of what we know about trees originated in the temperate zone, which is a little bit disappointing because that means that we don't know a whole lot about trees that are in the subtropics or the tropics. And this is the trees of my childhood. I grew up in the forests of New York State, in the rural part of the state, where every autumn the trees change color and the leaves fall, of course, for winter, because the tree goes into a hibernation and it can't continue to function through its leaves in the cold weather. So this amazed me as a kid, and I had no idea that 3/4 of the trees in the world stay green all year round, because I had only seen these trees in the winter where I grew up. And you have here trees that stay green all year round, as well as some that are deciduous. So that's pretty amazing. But when I was a little girl, I was kind of what we would call a geek. I collected flowers and pressed them, and I collected bird nests and feathers and other things. Here I am with my wildflower collection in one of the state fairs in New York. So it was kind of a lonely childhood because not too many people did what I did. Most of them wanted to do other things like learn how to do makeup or maybe go to the mall and shop for clothing. So it was kind of funny to be a lover of nature in my generation. I think that might be a little different for you now, but I talk to children a lot. My partner Vic, who's here tonight, hi Vic, and I give a lot of Zoom talks to schools, and we try to advise the kids. And one thing I always tell them is follow your passion. If you're passionate about architecture, I'm sure that's why you're here. And I was passionate about nature, which is why I ended up as a tree biologist. And my next door neighbor as a child was passionate about fashion. He was this really kooky guy named Tommy Hilfiger. And so he ended up selling blue jeans out of the back of his car and doing crazy things, designing fashions. So maybe like architecture, fashion is a different type of architecture, but we both are still friends and talk to kids a lot about following your passion, which is really important. So with that, my passion led me back to the trees from childhood to adults. And the amazing thing about climbing into the canopy, and I don't know if any of you knew this, but 50% of the species on the planet live in the top of a tree. So here's this incredible kind of city up there where all of these things are living and eating each other and reproducing and pollinating and flying and zipping around. So it's an incredible place on the planet where we never knew this until about 25 years ago. And as Vicente mentioned, in the 1950s, we coined the word aquanaut when scuba gear was developed. In the 1960s, we went to the moon as a species of human beings, and the word astronaut started to become used. But it wasn't until the 1980s that a couple of us developed this word Arbornaut because we invented the tools to climb into the treetops. And lo and behold, when we got up there, some 50% of species are living there, yet so few have been discovered. And as you know, they're probably getting destroyed before we can even classify them in science. Some of them we know a lot about. Here's the sloth, which is very cool, and everybody loves the sloth. Others we know nothing about. Anybody know what this is, just for fun? What is it? Oh, you can shake your head. Anybody shout it out? Yes, it is. But thank you for not having English. Maybe it's better in a different language, but it is a tardigrade or a water bear. They're microscopic, but they're found in every leaf and every tree. And I've been studying those for the last 10 or 15 years, in addition to other things. And lo and behold, we find them everywhere. And they also have been to the moon and back and done a few other things like live in Antarctica and hot springs. So we're still learning so much about what lives in the treetops and what they do and why they're important, from the big things like sloths to the little things like water bears. So I give you a quick chronology of this new science. As Vicente said, I was one of a handful of people that basically got to found a new science simply by virtue of asking a few questions and then trying to develop the methods. So in 1979 was when I actually sewed my first harness with seatbelt webbing, and I borrowed an industrial sewing machine from the caving club at Sydney University because I spent a large part of my life in Australia. And that was the beginning of going into the treetops. So I used a rope that I borrowed from the caving club. And to get that rope up to a branch, I made a slingshot out of a piece of metal. And then I put a fish line over the branch, and then a blind cord, and then finally had the strength with the cord to pull my rope over the branch and tie it off. So that was the first set of equipment for climbing trees, was rope, harness and slingshot. And even today, a lot of students still use that around the world because it's pretty inexpensive. And as you all know, students don't have a very big budget for a lot of their equipment. After I started climbing for 6 years, I taught a lot of other students to climb, and some people got nervous. Others were a little scared to go up the rope because it was always swaying back and forth. And so with an ecotourist lodge owner in Queensland, Australia, we designed the first skywalk or treetop walk, which is simply a bridge that goes through the treetops. So that way you can have the luxury of not having to climb up a rope and get all sweaty and maybe get a little scared and get some level of height sickness. The walkway is very easy. You can take children there, you can take people in wheelchairs there, and do all sorts of good things with canopy walkways. This is the idea that we're thinking would be wonderful outside of Barcelona, because Spain doesn't have any canopy access at all, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. After that, I worked with the Smithsonian Institution in the US, and we put the first construction crane in the rainforest of Panama so that you can use the actual bucket of the crane to go to leaves, to lizards, to sloths, whatever it was that you were trying to study, but only within the arm's reach of the crane. So that's the third method that we developed about 10 years after first climbing trees with ropes. And I went back from Australia to the US as a college professor and actually built the first canopy walkway in North America on a college campus in Massachusetts. Soon after that, I teamed up with French scientists who were incredibly innovative, and they had designed a hot air balloon that would not only take us to the treetops, but would also tow alongside of it a raft that we could tie off on the treetops and use as this incredible field lab up in the tops of trees. So we've used that around the world over the years. And then finally, I ended up as a professor in Florida, where I am now, and built the first public canopy walkway in North America as late as the year 2000. So really, it's only 20 years that the public has had any access to the treetops, despite the fact that half of the species that we share this planet with inhabit that part of the world. So I started a foundation to look more carefully at how people could access trees, because it's obviously a way to educate the public about the importance of conservation. And so for the last 20 years, I've had a foundation that helps other countries build canopy walkways, especially in places where the forests are really endangered. And I'll show you a couple examples in a minute. So finally, I just published a book, as Vicente said, in August. It kind of is the story of all of my crazy life adventures, climbing trees, falling out of trees, being a woman in science, which was not easy in many cases, and having these amazing opportunities to discover new species. So with that, I think the book is in your library, or if you're interested in tree stories, maybe you can see some of the chapters about my work with trees in India and trees in Ethiopia, trees in the Amazon, and other places that I'm going to take you to really quickly right now. So with that, what are the messages from trees, and what are the messages that I think you need to know and the public needs to know? So really quickly, I think it's important to know that trees are not free. And a lot of people think they're just decoration, especially business people and corporate people think, well, a tree can be cut down to build, to make roads, to grow crops, whatever it is that we need to make quick money. Trees seem to be very disposable, but in actual fact, trees are like the actual, paintings of the Louvre, or they're like gold bars. They're really, really valuable, and big trees are not very easy to grow back. So we need to save trees at all costs. Trees provide us with fresh water by filtering water through the canopy. Trees provide oxygen from the leaves, of course. course. They provide us with timber, which can be sustainable if we produce careful harvesting of forests. They provide us with lots of food. My favorite food comes from trees, which is chocolate. Trees provide us with fabrics and materials for clothing. They conserve the soil through their root systems. They house half of the world's species. And we now know that trees also store carbon, which is really great to offset all the pollution that human beings create. Trees control our climate. We're really worried about cutting down trees, and it heats up cities. It causes droughts. It causes all sorts of problems to our climate when we lose our trees. And finally, this is amazing, but over 2 billion people rely on trees for religion and spiritual heritage. It's really, really important in Ethiopia and India and many countries to have sacred trees as part of your growing up and part of your everyday spiritual habits. So that's one important thing about trees. They're valuable. They are so valuable. And the second one I think that is equally important for a lot of us is that trees are really inspirational, important for kids, important for adults, of course. But I have found through my career that by exposing kids to trees, it inspires them to think about careers. It empowers them to be bolder and braver, especially girls, in science. And so I've done a lot of programs over the years to get people out into the trees because I think it provides some sort of sanctuary for a lot of us. And that's become a really big part of my work, actually. Even kids in wheelchairs. I spent about 5 summers with a federal funding in the US to take kids that never thought they could climb a tree and help them learn to climb trees, which was very, very inspirational for them. And most of them discovered new species when they did that and got to publish original data. A lot of them discovered new water bears, by the way, because there are so many water bears that we still haven't discovered. So that's been a really positive side of tree exploration. And here are some of those students climbing trees in Kansas, of all places. Not very unusual, but still nobody had ever climbed trees in Kansas before. So they got to discover lots of new species. Here's our walkway in Florida. This is the first public walkway in North America. I want to show you a couple of these walkways because I would like to put a seed in the head of Vicente and some of his faculty that maybe you could have a canopy walkway outside of Barcelona someday. This wonderful small structure has given about 500,000 people every year the chance to experience the treetops in Florida, and especially for kids, it's been really important. These third graders also discovered a new species of weevil by making observations with their science teacher. So at age 11, they all got to be published scientists, which means, of course, you don't really need a Ph.D. or a lot of career experience to be a scientist, but maybe you just need to explore something that's different from everybody else. Here's a walkway in Malaysia. Anybody ever been to Malaysia? Maybe someday, one person, good for you. Oh, here too. Oh, fantastic. But this is an amazing example. Oh, I see lots of people raising their hand in the virtual audience. We just opened this walkway a couple years ago, but this is outside of Penang, and it has 15-minute access to about 2 million people, which is really fabulous because most of those people had never seen their own treetops before. And even better, we conducted what's called a Bio Blitz there. We had a big kind of 10-day period where we counted everything that we found in the forest. And because of that information, we were able to take it to the United Nations and create a UNESCO World Heritage Site out of this forest outside of Penang. So it was a fabulous result for the canopy and our canopy access to show the world that by putting in a canopy walkway, maybe you can really create fantastic conservation of your forest. Here's a walkway in the Amazon. This is 1/4 mile long. It cost $500,000 to build. But as you can imagine, almost everything we see there is a new species. And I take a lot of volunteers, students, corporate leaders, all kinds of field groups down to this site because the Amazon is such an important forest for all of us. And going into the treetops of the Amazon is a very, very special experience and really important, especially for some of the leaders of the world to understand more about the treetops. Here's a fabulous walkway in Southwest China outside of Kunming. And again, this walkway gets some million visitors a year, and it's really educating a lot of Chinese kids and families about the importance of their forests, which is really important in a country like that that's growing so quickly. Here's one in Ghana. Fantastic. There are new walkways going up in many countries except Spain, I'm sorry to say, and maybe we can fix that, but wonderful access to different trees and different organisms, which gives people a lot of inspiration. And finally, back near my own hometown, this is a canopy walkway in Vermont where those trees change color. This is a drone image of that walkway. But again, even forests that we think we know a lot about, like New England and North America, have all sorts of secrets that we have yet to discover. And one really fun thing we built and put into this walkway is a spider web. I wanted to show that to the architecture people here. This is just part of the trail so that you can jump on this spider web, and then there's an exhibit to learn about spiders in the treetops. So there's lots of ways we can combine art with these canopy walkways and make it more fun. So why do we bother to do this, and why do people need to know about the forest? I'd like to show you a place where the forests are almost gone so that you can get a sense of how important it is to save trees. And this is a country that I love and I have worked in for over 10 years because it's so important that we try to change and save the trees in Ethiopia. This picture is the last remaining forest in Ethiopia. You can see in the center is a little round building, and that's the Coptic or Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So the last forests in Ethiopia are actually the churchyard, and that's why we call them church forests, because the priests there believe that they are the stewards of all of God's creatures. Similarly, I, as a conservation biologist, believe that I should try to save species. So believe it or not, I have a lot in common with the priests of Ethiopia. And as a result, we've created a partnership to save these last bits of forest. You can see this incredible Google Earth image where these little tiny green dots are the trees, and all this brown stuff is the subsistence agriculture of northern Ethiopia, because they don't yet have metal tools or advanced irrigation for their forests. So it's pretty important to save these tiny green dots. They're kind of like important art galleries with paintings, because all the birds are there, all the insects, all the animals. Nothing lives out here except for the crops and a couple insect pests sometimes that try to eat the crops. So what do we do for this situation? By working with the priests, by praying a lot and becoming a trusted partner with them, we were able to figure out ways to link science and religion. And in conservation now, probably like architecture, sometimes you have to work with very different kinds of partners, not just the people that you think might be the normal population, but maybe some groups of people that are very different. And in the case of Ethiopia, the priests have the stewardship over their forest. So together, I give workshops for the priests, such as here, because they don't have Google Earth images. They don't have computers or fencing or measurements. They had no idea that their forests were endangered because they never leave their little church in the middle of their own forest. And when they saw those Google Earth images, they absolutely had a heart attack. They said, oh my gosh, this is serious. We are failing in our job to take care of all of God's creatures. So of their own idea, they thought, what if we take the stone out of the farmer's fields, which he really appreciates, trees. And what if we build these stone walls to keep the cattle from eating the trees and keep the people from coming too close to the edges of the trees and killing them sometimes with their plowing. And lo and behold, we now are building these beautiful stone walls, very simple, not too expensive, and they are saving this whole genetic library, as we call it, for the country of Ethiopia. And I'm fundraising about $1 million. We're halfway there to save the 40 highest biodiversity forests in Ethiopia, because that means they have all of their species for their future of their country. And if they lose those species, they would never get them back. So if you go to Ethiopia, you might travel around the countryside and see some church forests with these beautiful walls, and you'll see that gorgeous green habitat inside of this agricultural area, which is saving the biodiversity of Ethiopia. And we're hopeful of reaching our goal of these 40 church forests in the next couple of years. The other issue that we always face in a culture like this is, how do you help the next generation of priests? And so I've been working with the kids a lot to try to educate them as well. They love to collect their own bugs. They love to learn about their forests, but they don't have any books. So I wrote a children's book and translated it into their native language, Amharic. And so now when people buy an English copy of this book about a little girl who works to save her forests in Ethiopia, we print one in the local language and we distribute it to the kids for free. So they get the first time they've ever owned a book, which is a really important way, of course, of educating them about their biodiversity. So lots of crazy things that sometimes you have to do in your job that you never expected to do, like maybe giving books to kids or maybe working with priests, who knows. So I'd like to wrap up with just one sense of hope, because right now we have a really big challenge with forests. In my lifetime, which is a little older than you, of course, half of the world's forests have disappeared. So that's a pretty depressing figure. And between burning and clearing and cities expanding, we keep cutting forests down, which is a really dreadful thing. So I'd like to talk a little bit about my latest program. I brought you the summary, Vicente, to keep. It's a program called Mission Green, where we're hoping to save the forests of the 10 countries that are the most endangered in terms of their forest stewardship right now. And this program was developed based on a model that a friend of mine developed as an oceanographer, and her name is Sylvia Earle. And 10 years ago, she started a program called Mission Blue to save the most endangered spots in the ocean, where coral reefs were endangered or fisheries were endangered. And so she has, over the years, developed these hope spots, which brings attention by local people to the fact that they need to be really careful about overfishing and over polluting their waters. So with Mission Green, I was fortunate to have the world's most famous biologist, who happens to just have passed away 2 weeks ago at Harvard, named Ed Wilson, as the chair of the board of my program. And he wrote a book called Half Earth, where he said, what if we save half the planet for that 99% of species, and the other half could be for humankind? And so the only thing about that challenge is that we don't want to save the worst half of the planet. We don't want to save just the deserts or just the ice. We have to save some areas that are forest, because we know that's where most of the species are living. So with Professor Wilson's help, we created a map of the most important areas where we need to save those forests. And those areas are in yellow: redwood forests, the Amazon. I put Spain in there because maybe it's kind of an endangered forest with all the development going on. Ethiopia, Madagascar, India, New Guinea. We have some obvious places where the forests are extremely endangered. And then we have other great places where we have already built canopy walkways. And the reason I want to bring that issue back of canopy walkways is that we have found if we build a walkway, then tourism develops and the people that live in these forests can earn money by becoming guides and bird leaders and ecotourist lodge owners and boat operators. And so we're hoping to build these canopy walkways, turn them over to the local people so that they can get a sustainable income, because we can't expect them just to save their trees for all of us that are out there in the world making money in other ways. We need to give them jobs and make sure that it's very sustainable. So I've developed a world-class group of experts to help with this project. And we're fundraising right now to build a walkway in Madagascar starting this year, which has less than 3% of its forest remaining. And we're really hopeful that we can get these 10 forests saved before they disappear by building these walkways, hiring local people who then become the conservation stewards in these locations. So in summary, it's kind of like an emergency in a hospital that we have to hurry up and save these areas of the highest biodiversity and make sure that we can do it quickly, because unlike some things, maybe artwork or manuscripts that you can put in a vault and come back to in 50 years, we can't recreate these species that become extinct. We have to do it extremely quickly, or else the next generation is basically toast. So with that, I want to just close by saying back here in Barcelona, there might be ways to promote trees, maybe through a canopy walkway. We've talked a little bit about hosting a Bio Blitz here, getting kids to climb trees, figuring out ways to integrate art and science, maybe putting a spider web out in the forest, and hopefully a link to my program, Mission Green. So that is the end, and I would love to take questions. Thank you very much. I guess we're starting with live questions, and then maybe we'll have time for some virtual questions.
Okay, test.
Test.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. My question is simply, you talk a lot about the city, so to speak, in the canopy that exists that we are rarely exposed to. Do you have any insight on also the city below the roots, the mycelium connecting everything? And has that been part of your research or your career at all?
Absolutely. And I did work on underground. Oh, good. Back in the 80s, when I lived in Australia, I did a lot of work on the underground roots. And it turns out they actually give a competitive edge to certain species of trees. Those mycorrhizae connect and they share water and they share nutrients, both with their own species as well as with other species. It's easier to access them, believe it or not, through rhizotrons and other technical equipment. It was harder to access the canopy. So I shifted my work to the canopy simply because fewer people were working on the canopy. But what is interesting is that the roots create a communication center for trees, but so do the leaves. When, for example, insects bite leaves, they produce a chemical and it goes into the air and it tells the next tree, the enemy is here. You have to get your chemical defense ready. So the leaves communicate as well as the leaves of trees. It's extraordinary that trees have all this amazing sophistication we didn't know about. So both parts of the tree are important, and I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. That was your question.
Oh, I want to add something to that question. Is it we always tend to use trees for shading, mainly shading or aesthetics, or even quality of air. Is it do we consider of like exchanging the above surface canopy with the ground cover or like green surfaces? Because I took in reference Barcelona. It's like mainly planted with trees. We have a huge canopy along the streets and a huge way of shading, but under them, we don't find any greenery. Is it possible to consider the exchange of e-leaf index, or like just exchanging the greenery?
Right. So two things. One is, of course, the root system is usually the same size as the canopy. And one thing I notice in the city a lot is we put cement. We are suffocating the root system. We have to be so careful about that. And the other thing is some trees actually don't permit other vegetation to grow underneath it. I don't know if you've ever looked at pines, for example, their needles are very acidic, so they don't promote other greenery beneath, but other tree species do. Like laurel, for example, likes to have things growing beneath it. So you can have layers of green if that's what you're talking about. And you should, because the more layers, the more species you promote, the more pollinators, insects and birds and other wildlife can be there. It's so much, and that's why the rainforest is so diverse, because it sometimes has 5 or 6 layers of green, which is really quite wonderful. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for the lecture. You personally inspired me to climb some
Oh,
trees.
good. You'll climb tonight.
For sure. No, but my question is not that biology related, because we all know that forests are important carbon storages, environments and home for many species. But have you heard of any programs of forests becoming economic capital storage of forestry investments from public funds or private funds? Because I personally have heard of it, but I thought that maybe you know more about initiatives of storing capital in the forest and as a quite an efficient conservation program. Because
Right. And there are a lot, and Vic, my friend Vic and I do talk sometimes, and he talks about the finance because was a trader and I'm a biologist, but it's a huge effort and people are still struggling with the models. But I think about 30 years ago, they started the first program called RED, REDD, which was, taking value for forests and having countries invest in them and investing in planting. One of the problems that we always find is how to control those investments. If you're taking a forest for capital, or say you're paying a fee when you fly on a plane to offset your own carbon footprint, how do we actually control what's going on in the Amazon where you think you're investing? And that's why I'm developing this program, to try to get the local people to be invested in the capital. It's very, very difficult to police forest conservation, but at the same time, there's a lot of interest in Scandinavian countries in particular have invested big time in tropical forests, offsetting and paying capital in order to create an industry out of that. It's still not perfect because we have so much poaching, and now we have fires from climate change and things that cause trouble to that capital investment, but it is a great idea. And the more you might think of something innovative that would help people keep those forests and invest in them financially, the better off the world would be. I would challenge all of you to try to think, how do you keep a forest and make it some sort of economic investment, because that's the way the world tends to think. And I'm always challenged about those spiritual forests, because I tell my economic friends, how do we get a value for prayer? I mean, basically, people go to these forests in India and Ethiopia to pray, but who has a dollar sign for a prayer? Does anybody know what that is worth? And it's a big challenge to my economic friends. Thanks for bringing up that topic. Yeah.
Hey, thanks. I really enjoyed that talk. I was just wondering if you could, when you were talking about getting people into science, if you can recommend anything for us to keep an eye out for the next time we climb a tree.
Oh my gosh, there's so much, but I would say focus on the little things, not only the big things. There's amazing, extraordinary things on every single leaf. And technically it's called a phylloplane, and there's a lot of life there. There are, little mosses and lichens growing on leaf surfaces. There's little water bears, maybe a little small to see, but there's so many beetles. There are millions of insects in treetops, and you probably have only seen 1 or 2. So I would just challenge you to see if you can see 20 different kinds. Why? Because they're gorgeous. They're all purple and silver and metal looking and crazy, proboscis and antennae, and really fun to look at. So the detail is amazing. And I love leaves. I study leaves, and a reason I only studied insects is they kept eating my leaves and I got angry at the insects, but the leaf shapes are extraordinary. Something like 1 in 100 leaves has not been eaten by a bug. So I challenge you to find any leaves that don't have a hole in them or a piece of, a gall or a little brown spot where they've been attacked and bitten by a bug. So those are just some fun things to look for. I don't know if they're fun for everybody, but they're fun for me. Have fun climbing.
Hello, thank you for the lecture. I find it really inspirational not to take for granted forests or trees surrounding us, even in the urban forestry, like in the cities. But I have a question. You showed us really a good example of fragmentation. It was a small fragment of a forest, and I really find it really bizarre to have to give accessibility to people to such a small fragment, because this will require accessibility problems for the people, like what is the type of vehicles that could access the site, or even more, could it impose or change the behavior of species in this small fragments, because this small infrastructure that would be very light could impose different metamorphosis of the space.
That's a great question. That keeps me awake every night, is these small patches of forest. Should we lock them up and not let anybody go there? But the answer to that is almost always, if people don't understand or see the forest or smell the forest or love the forest, the chances are it will be totally cut down. So we face this kind of challenge. Do we allow people in and try to have them learn respect for the trees, or do we keep them out and have them say, cut it down because we don't even know anything about it? So that's really the moral dilemma. And it's a shame we've got ourselves to this point as a human species that we have allowed forests to degrade so much. But even with building a canopy walkway, people say, well, maybe you shouldn't build it because then people will want to come to the forest. But I think when they see it and they go on this walk, it's very controlled. They can't squish the roots. They can't go off the trail. They just go on the walkway. It's a wonderful way actually of controlling the people and helping them love the forest. So I feel the gamble is better to get them to love the forest than to keep them out and say, we don't know about forests, so cut it down because we don't care. So, but that's it, that we need psychologists, don't we, to help us with this problem. And it is a big problem. And yet we're at a point now where so many forests are fragmented that it's a very difficult issue to how do we let people contact nature, which is part of their spirit and their need as a healthy species as well. So good luck. Don't let the forest here get so shrunken that you have this problem of Ethiopia.
Okay, I just discovered a scientific pattern that only boys are asking from Auditorium and only girls are asking online. So there is some
But only girls are answering the question too.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, I was expecting also the girls in the auditorium maybe will make some questions. Well, the first question online from Lucia and Leia that we can join, because they are talking about the risk about doing the walkways, the increase of tourists, if this can affect the wildlife. I think you already answered about that. Yeah,
A little bit. I'll just add the risk for humans too. I laugh when kids say to me, isn't it scary to go up a tree? But I always say it's more dangerous to cross the street, probably in Barcelona, certain times of day, than it is to be in the canopy. And so far, we don't find the animals are too much disturbed. Most animals don't recognize humans as a threat up in the treetops because they've never seen them before. So that's a good thing.
good. One question is, what do you think about using the walkways to promote the cultivation of edible forests and agroforestry? Do you know any projects that explore this potential?
That's a great idea. And no, I don't. That's amazing. There are, of course, plenty of forests that are growing mushrooms, and that's a project on the forest floor. But the idea of maybe some kind of, hydroponics up the tree in the treetops or some activity is kind of something that would be very different and innovative. And I have not heard of that until tonight. So there's a good idea.
Julia, whoever you are, please, let's talk. We can maybe discuss about doing something in Barcelona. So he said, we are working with temperature and humidity control inside and outside of buildings at the moment. I found a bit of conflicting information on how plants regulate humidity in the air and how it can be used both to reduce humidity by absorbing water, vapor through their leaves or increasing humidity through evapotranspiration. Could you explain a little bit how plants and trees could help regulate humidity in our urban environments?
Sure. And it is a physiological question and it does get complicated really quickly. But, leaves are these amazing machines and they do release. When you go to a forest, it's humid, it's great for your complexion, it's shady because, of course, they are these machines that are controlling the water table and the water climate. They're pulling the water in from the roots. They're releasing carefully out through the canopy. So when you lose the canopy, you have a hotter and drier climate. So to keep things slightly more humid, you need the foliage. And to keep the soil moister, that humidity helps. If you don't have the trees, you have the sun baking the soil, and then you lose that whole exchange of water really rapidly. So in many, many ways, those leaves are these incredible little humidity machines, oxygen machines, homes for biodiversity. They do all these extraordinary things as these little tiny green organisms. It's kind of neat, and they're very, very sophisticated. So I would encourage you to do a little bit of reading up about what a leaf does. It's pretty cool. I hope I describe it in my book. So maybe read chapter 3.
Good. I read the Arbornaut and it's quite great, the history.
Thanks, Vincente.
Well, Igor is asking something about some kind of hiking trails and which is that longer walkways, and if at some point they are also integrated in longer areas of walking around the forest or the mountains and so on.
Yeah. So the longest 2 walkways right now, there's one in Canada that's 1 mile long, and there's the one in the Amazon I showed you is a 1/2 mile long. All of those in the Amazon, the trees are so tall, they rely on the trunks for the support of the bridges. In Canada, the trees are so short, they can use pole structure. So there's 2 different construction methods. It's a lot easier to build longer walkways with poles. You have to be awfully sensitive to the trees when you're building and using them as your support, because you don't want to attract termites or choke the tree in any way. But it's very, very possible to put what we call a necklace around a tree to support these bits and pieces. So how long could we go? I don't know. That's a great question. Maybe you need the longest one in Spain.
No.
I don't think you need it.
So someone was so inspired about the idea of these leaves and the trees from the tropics that is asking if, what do you think about bringing certain species from the tropics to the European climate? Is that wise? Are there any dangers to altering existing ecosystems?
Right. So there are, unfortunately, large dangers to bring species that aren't native. To bring in new things usually means maybe they become a weed or an invasive pest. Maybe they bring with them some other pests. And the chances are your native birds and insects don't want to live in them because they're not adapted to them. So for the most part, it's really better not to bring in new species. And there's problems in the world where people have introduced species. We have a huge problem in Florida where I live and Vic lives. I don't know if you've read about it, but the Burmese pythons escaped from pet shops in Miami, and now there are over 300,000 Burmese pythons in the Everglades National Park because there's no enemies to eat them. They're in their native country, they have enemies and predators, but in Florida, none. And they're huge. They grow to 30 feet long and they're scaring all the tourists, and they've eaten 99% of the birds in the Everglades. So it's a very serious invasion.
Yeah, in Baidaura, in fact, we had 5 beehives, But then it seems that there is an invasion of the Asian wasp
Oh,
that is killing all our bees. So
Mhm.
our students are not eating honey because of some invasive species.
Wow,
So,
yeah.
yeah, we need to take care. So there is another question about, my question is, do these attempts to create urban forests truly promote a sustainable amount of biodiversity, or is better that we focus in increasing the area of non-urban forests?
right. Well, two things. I think we definitely need urban trees. They're great for kids. They're great for certain things, some birds, some bees, some insects, but they don't support the level of biodiversity of a whole forest patch because some things need 10 trees to be able to live. Certain things like a hawk or an eagle can't live on one tree alone. So the urban tree is really important because it's better than nothing. But the big patches of forests, wherever you have them, are important to save for a lot of the wildlife that needs more space.
Okay, and the last question, do you think there is a possibility of conserving the natural environment by integrating into the city due to the growing populations, such as urban garden that some cities have been implementing?
Yes, well, I think we have to. I think our challenge is, especially your challenge, because I'll probably be in the grave pretty soon, is that so much is in the city. 75% of people will be living in the cities by what, 2050? And so we need to think hard about how do we integrate urban trees, urban green, urban gardening. I was looking today when I got interviewed by your local TV station, they had a huge aerial of Barcelona, almost no rooftops had any green. There's a huge space waiting for somebody to develop things. So maybe that could be a project too.
Well, your answer is great in order to explain that we as an architect, we don't want just to put some green on top of the architecture.
Right,
We want that the architecture become green.
right.
So as we were
I hear you.
discussing, a tree has some billions of years of history,
Uh-huh.
and that's why it's a perfect machine that is able to capture CO2 and to produce oxygen through the leaves.
Right,
Our buildings are just 10,000 years of history.
that's
If
right.
we have 1,000 more years, our buildings will fly
Right.
and will produce energy and many other things. So that means that it's not about thinking small.
Right.
We really need to be thinking big. We need to be thinking about reinventing and redefining what means to be a city, what means to be a building, and
Mhm.
then not just thinking on putting a bit of more nature and make it a greener. It's to reinvent the deep principles of what means to be a city or to be a building. And that's why we are here, not just for decoration, but for real understanding on the science of nature and try to apply to architecture. So Meg,
Fantastic.
thank you very much. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming here. We hope we can continue working
I
together.
look forward.
And
Thank
thank you
all of you.
for everyone to come to the lecture, to be here and to be online. Thank you.
Thank you.